Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today. I'm Ron. This is Southwest Colorado Adventures, and thanks so much for joining me today. If you're watching this, you're probably curious about what the different size sprockets will do for your bike. And though this isn't really about what they're going to do, I will do that later once I have this third one put on my bike, and I'll do a comparison of all three of them, so look out for that. This is more about just how simple the process is to change out the sprockets. I know the first time that I did it, I was hesitant. I've never done it before. So I did like everybody does. Went to YouTube, started watching some videos, and then once I actually did it, it was pretty amazingly simple. So what I wanted to do is just provide y'all with a step-by-step process for how to make this change happen. It's really not a big deal, definitely nothing to be intimidated by, and it can be done in about 30 minutes or so. So come along. I'm going to point out all of the tools that you're going to need. The way I'm doing it, there's probably different ways of doing it. I'll say again, my disclaimer, I'm not a mechanic. So if there's a better way out there, let me know. But this has worked for me pretty well so far. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is walk through the tool list. You don't really need a whole lot. You need a long-handled breaker bar, preferably. You can also put a pipe on the end of a socket wrench if you need to be able to get that sprocket off. I got a pair of pliers to break the chain. I've got a flathead screwdriver to be able to break the chain. I've got a 12mm wrench to be able to adjust the wheel alignment and the chain sag. I've got an 8mm socket, I've got a 10mm socket, and I've got a 12mm deep socket that's also for the chain adjustment and wheel alignment. This piece of wood here is actually going to be used as well. With that, let's go ahead and get things going. Oh, you notice that? I've actually got a new POV recorder, so let's see what that looks like. Hopefully it's going to work. Maybe it'll give you a little better perspective on everything that I'm doing without me having to move the camera 150 times. So let's get busy. First of all, we're going to get started by taking apart everything that we need to access. There's 2 bolts on this sprocket cover here, and we'll go ahead and pull those guys out. Those are not tightened. They're not any kind of seal or anything like that. They're just for protection, I guess. That comes off super easily, and it reveals the sprocket. That is the OEM 15.2 sprocket that I've got on there. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to move over and take this chain guard off. That requires a 10mm socket to pull those off. Again, not a lot of tension, no need to wrench them down, just for protection, but we need access to the chain and everything. Set this stuff out of the way. Now, you may be tempted to break into the chain, but you don't want to do that yet. The first thing you want to do is, I will have to admit that I left off one tool. You don't have to do it this way, but it makes it easier. I got a hammer just to be able to bend back this little protective washer that bends over to keep that nut in place. You've just got to get up underneath it. You can tell that I've done this a few times. It's already kind of bent. It is handy to have it in first whenever you get started. I like being able to just tap it back. Basically just flattening that out so that we can get the big nut off. All right, let me get my hands out of the way. So now you can see these 2 flaps on either side here will pull forward. When you put it back on, it's going to be next to impossible to get that lined up exactly where it was. So it doesn't really matter. You just grab another little piece, whatever chunk you've got, and bend it over on the 2 opposing sides. No big deal. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and break this off. So I said that we're going to use this piece of wood, and this is where we're going to use it. Whenever you're placing this through here, you do want to make sure that you get it on the metal on the other side, preferably, and not on There's some brake lines and stuff like that over there. So just make sure, it's easy enough to scooch over and just make sure that you've got the board on top of the metal and it's not pinching any of those lines over there. With that set, we're gonna come over here and we're gonna do a little lefty-loosey action. And it pops loose, easy enough. I may have gotten a little bit of grime on the outside of that nut. It's not coming off with my fingers as easily as it had in the past. There we go. The washer pops off. And if you'll notice, the washer has got a spline pattern, just like the drive shaft in there. We'll set that off to the side, set the nut off to the side. Next thing we're gonna do is take the chain apart. Now it helps to take the chain apart if you go ahead and loosen these back nuts, the adjustment for the chain. It just gives it a little bit of slack. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. Once you get that outside one, usually, but not always, you can loosen the inner one with your fingers. But that's why we've got our 12mm wrench over here as well. Okay, on this part, this is where we want to take our 24mm socket and go ahead and just loosen up the axle a bit. Now we can get just a little extra slack in there, make it easier to get to everything. That'll make it easier to pop off the chain. So here, make sure we've got it in first. So you're going to spin the chain around until you get to the master link right here. And it's obvious, it's usually a different color, but if your chain is dirty, then it may not look like it. But it's basically got a little bracket on top that holds the whole link together. So the easiest way I've found to do this is you can use your screwdriver, but if you open up your channel locks just a little bit, you can kind of grab the back post here, and you can also grab the edge of the link and just push it back. That gives you just a little bit of slack in it so that you can get your screwdriver back in there, and then it just pops off. Not a big deal. So to remove the link, this little piece basically comes off pretty easily. Now, if you probably have O-rings up inside there. So as you're pulling this apart, just make sure you hang on to the O-rings because we're going to put it all back together. Depending on how much slack you have in your rear wheel, you may not even need to break the chain. Like if you start, well, you're going to have to, because if you start off way back here where you've got your chain fully extended, then putting a smaller tooth sprocket on there is going to increase the amount that you need to bring it back because it's smaller. So hopefully this is a configuration that you're starting with. This is the OEM setup, so that should be standard for most of you. Just break the chain apart. So now you're in a position to be able to actually pull this sprocket off because the chain is loose enough to give you slack. If you put it in neutral, you can just run it around. And it's off. And just to give you a comparison, 15-tooth sprocket, 14-tooth sprocket. It doesn't look like a huge difference between the two, but the difference between a 15 and a 16 was pretty substantial. And that's, I don't know, 15% bigger. So anyway, make sure you don't get them mixed up. It's easy because this one's super dirty. But if it's a brand new bike, it might be easy to get them mixed up. So there you go. Put that one on. You really don't have to run the chain like this. I just do it that way. I don't know. I kind of do it probably just a hair bit different every time I do this. It does tend to kink down at the bottom. So the one thing that you do want to do is you want to make sure as you're linking this back up that you've got the same amount of slack on both sides. You don't want it to be one tooth shorter on top and bottom, but I don't think that generally happens, but it can. There, I just pulled the wheel out to take some of the slack out of the chain. Since we have a smaller sprocket, that means that we've got more slack than we started out with. So to prevent the issue of having your teeth misaligned, and then once they're on the teeth, they're on the teeth. If yours looks ugly like mine does, I'm going to go ahead and clean this up just a hair. Probably not a requirement, but man, that was ugly. Chains only last so long anyway. And I've got a longer chain for the 16 tooth because I couldn't adjust the OEM chain out far enough or in close enough to be able to make it fit. Before you put it on, make sure that you've got the little rubber washers on the inside here. Grab one side. All I did was just pull the axle in a little bit since I've got it loose, just to give me enough slack to play with to get this thing put back together again. And voila, there we are. Even as careful as I was being, I still lost one of those little rubber pieces. So luckily I had an extra master link from my other chain with some extra little rubber washers. Okay, once you get everything basically put together, it may be kind of hard to snap that all in place. That's another reason I've got these channel locks, just to kind of help me squeeze it together. Once I've got it squeezed together, then you put the retainer through the middle hole, face it towards the other one, and you can slide it on. I'm able to slide it most of the way on with my finger, and we'll just do the reverse. Just grab that far post and then just kind of shove with your channel locks, and that gets it all set up and it's sealed back up. So now that is not 10 millimeters that we want that set to. We're not going to adjust that yet, but we're going to have to adjust the axle way, way back because we've got a smaller front sprocket. Apparently my GoPro is overheating. Hopefully it cooled it off enough to get this wrapped up. We're pretty close to the end. So now we just need to go ahead and put the washer back on and the nut, which is no big deal. We're going to put it back in gear. Hopefully get the breaker bar. Put our piece of wood back on the bottom side this time. And there we go. Don't forget at this point, you want to go ahead and bend these back, and you can see that I didn't line them up. What I usually do is just kind of start in the middle of one side and start getting that washer bending the right direction. This actually works with a tire tool as well. Works with a bigger screwdriver if you've got one of those as well. Here's the tire tool option. It's just not as sharp, and it's kind of got to bend the way you want it to go. It just helps it follow along there. That side is bent into position. Come over here, start at the middle, start getting a lip to grab onto with your tire tool or larger screwdriver. I can't seem to find my larger screwdriver currently, so tire tool it is. Get a little bit of a lip. There we go. That is good to go. Now while I'm here, everything is good there, so there's really nothing else to do with that. I'm going to go ahead and put that cover back on just for grins. Remember, these are 8 millimeter. And they don't need to be, just snug them up. I mean, they don't need to be cinched down super hard, just enough to keep them from wiggling out, and they're good to go. There we go. While I'm in the reassembly mood, go ahead and put this chain guard back on. If you haven't cleaned your chain recently or lubed it, while you've got this guard off, it's a great time to do it. Chain guard is 10 millimeter. And again, just needs to be snugged up. Nothing major there. Now the last thing we're going to do is go ahead and go back and take the slack out of this chain and hope that I've got enough room here to be able to pull it back all the way so that I don't need to buy a shorter chain, because I would prefer not to, now that I've already got 2 chains. This one we're going to get a little closer on. And hopefully you can notice in this shot that there's ribs along this flat piece on the inside of the swing arm. Ideally, you want to make sure that the marks on this side and on the other side line up. They're on the same marks. That way your wheel is trued and you're going straight down the road instead of sideways. Obviously, that's a regular maintenance thing right there. So my guess is most of y'all are very familiar with how to do that. This is where I use my 12 millimeter deep socket. So that's about on the 4th right there. That's about on the 4th there. But if you notice, that is not the proper amount of sag in the chain. So we're going to back it off just a hair. That is just right there. So now, once we've got those lined up, put the set nut on the back side of each. At this point, I usually go ahead and snug up the axle once I know I've got it aligned. Okay, good there. Then we also use our 12 millimeter to hold this while we tighten up this outside nut once we've got it set. Okay. Got any value out of this? I'd appreciate a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I do stuff like this. I'll ride all over the place. I just really try to have a lot of fun. I'm going to put the link down below. I got the Sprocket from Hitchcock's. I bought one from Amazon, but it didn't have the right spline pattern. So I had to send that one back. And then I got one from Hitchcock's because I knew it would be right. And it's true. Both that I've gotten from Hitchcock's have worked great. So coming up is I'm going to take this 14-tooth Sprocket and see if I can go up the trail that I couldn't make with the 15-tooth Sprocket. So we'll see how that works out. There's going to be another video coming up here shortly that you haven't seen before. Feel free and check that one out. Again, thank you very much for coming along with me on this little mechanical adventure. I did lose one of those little rubber washers, so luckily that was the only fail that we actually had today. Pretty simple install. Hope it helped you out, and come back for more. Thanks. Ron signing out. Be safe riding.